Hey everybody, welcome back to our kind of summer journey into courageous generosity. We did this little two-part series a while back, and if you're watching this, maybe you didn't get a chance to see that series, maybe you're a friend of somebody, maybe you're just some Facebook connective tissue, but the idea is how can we be courageously generous, not only to our church and church family and kind of as an act of spiritual discipline, but just in our everyday normal lives. And so some of us are kind of reading through this little book called I Like Giving. If you're here in Northern Colorado, if you attend in person at Crossroads Church, you can pick that up in the atrium or you can go online and grab it. But so we're just kind of having this little conversation around generosity, and particularly financial generosity, and that comes with a lot of weight in church world sometimes. I don't know if you've ever heard of the name Creflo Dollar. So this, just even today, someone sent me an email with this link that this pastor Creflo Dollar has preached a message kind of changing their mind about what they've said about tithing for many years. And it's actually interesting, I don't know much about Creflo Dollar. I just remember his name floating around a few years ago. He was raising money for a plane for their ministry. And listen, I'm not passing judgment. I don't have any, maybe they need a plane. I have no idea. But what's interesting was I watched a little bit of the message, and he just basically said, hey, everything I've been teaching for the last 20 years on tithing, throw it out. He said, get rid of it. If I wrote a book, if you heard me say something, and he talked about how God had really been working on his heart and changing his tune on it and his understanding of it. I thought it was really fantastic. So maybe part of your courageous generosity, listen to Creflo Dollar's message on it. I didn't listen to the whole thing. It was like an hour and 20 minutes. So you can go and listen to it if you want to. But just kind of this idea that tithing is really a law that was based on this idea of blessing and cursing. We talked a little bit about that during our little 2-week series. But today what I wanted to do was talk about this really audacious claim that the Apostle Paul makes. And I think of the Apostle Paul as really an amazing individual, brilliant person, but a human being. And a lot of times I try to understand, where was Paul coming from? What maybe was motivating him? Paul had his own experiences in life. He had his upbringing. He had his education. He had those things that guided him and shaped his worldview. And he wrote these letters. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, Paul is talking about this kind of controversy that was taking place in the Corinthian church around, do you eat meat sacrificed to idols? Because the idea was meat that was sacrificed to idols, if you ate that, you would somehow get the power of that God inside of your being. That was kind of the prevailing thought. And so there was this, pretty legalistic reality that if you were a Jew, you didn't eat meat sacrificed to idols. And Paul comes along and says, hey, let's abandon this idea of the law, and let's abandon, Christ has fulfilled all of that. And he said, but here's the thing, if you're offered it, just eat it. No big deal. Don't worry about it. But if you're offered it and someone says, hey, that was sacrificed to an idol, then you kind of take into account their conscience, right? And what Paul's saying is, hey, let's consider the benefit of our neighbor in this. And then he makes this kind of crazy statement. It's 1 Corinthians 11, chapter 1, but it really relates to what he just said in chapter 10. He says, be imitators of me as I am of Christ. So basically he's saying, hey, this is what I do. If I go to eat with people and they just put food in front of me, or I go to the market and buy food, I just buy it. I don't ask, I don't care, I give thanks for it. It's wonderful. But if I'm with people and they make an objection and they say, hey, this was sacrificed to an idol, then he says, I take into account their consciousness because I'm trying to live my life in such a way that benefits others. So he says, imitate me as I imitate Christ. You're wondering what to do. And I think that's a fascinating statement. Imitate me as I imitate Christ. And I've taken that verse in my own life at times, and I've asked the question, could I say that to people? When I was when I was a part of a church, maybe not on staff at a church, but I was volunteering, which was a long time ago. So I've been on staff at churches for a long time. But when I was in college, let's say, Wendy and I, we volunteered in a couple of different areas. And I remember thinking to myself, my contribution to this faith community, right? If everybody imitated me, where would we be? Right? If everybody imitated my commitment to the faith community, if everybody imitated me and my generosity, right, where would we be as a church? And I think it's a really interesting question when it comes to this idea of, let's talk about generosity, right? Like as I seek to follow Jesus, and I apply Jesus's grace and principle and like his audaciousness to my giving, right? If everybody kind of modeled their life after me, where would our world be? Would our world be a selfish place? Would our world be a really generous place? And I think about that in the life of a church as well. And I think it's a good question for all of us to ask, like the measure of generosity that I bring to my faith community, right? The openness that I have to supporting financially the work that God is doing through us. Like if everybody kind of just lived under the same principles, where would we be as a church? I would encourage you to ask yourself that question. Like my commitment to love other people, my commitment to volunteer, if everybody lived in the same way, could they imitate me and we have a healthy church? And that's a pretty difficult thing to ask sometimes. Like if everybody attended church, right, the way I attended, would anybody ever be there, right? And so I want to encourage us as we think about courageous generosity to do some introspection this week and really ask ourselves, like, if everybody on the planet lived out their generosity like me, if they imitated the way in which I gave to my neighbor, the way in which I gave to my church, the way in which I gave to nonprofits that I believe in, like how healthy would my neighborhood be? How healthy would my church be? How healthy would the nonprofit be? Right? And it's not a matter of how much I give. I think it's a principled reality, right? If my heart towards giving was, if everybody had that same heart, if everybody had my heart, am I really imitating Christ? Am I imitating Jesus? And would it be enough? Right? And I think it's a great question to ask for those of us that love our churches. So maybe you don't attend Crossroads, maybe you attend a different church, you live in a different area of the country, let's say. But I would want us all to ask that question. Like if everyone kind of had the same spirit and the same heart of giving generously to the work, where would we be? It's a good question to ask. Could people imitate me? Now, I'm pleased to say that there's a lot of areas in my life that I don't think I would want people to imitate me on. And I'm trying, right? I'm trying to follow Jesus. But I hope that there are areas of my life that I could say, hey, be imitators of me as I am an imitator of Christ. I want to be an imitator of Christ in the grace that I give to people. I want to be an imitator of Christ in just a generous spirit. I want to be an imitator of Christ of saying, hey, everything I have is God's. And hopefully people could look at my life and see that. So that's the encouragement for us this week as we're kind of navigating some of these waters of becoming more courageous in our generosity. I think it's a courageous question to ask ourselves, not to be condemning, but to be convicting and to challenge, to say, hey, if everybody gave like me in this world, where would we be? Something to think about. All right, have a great week, and I look forward to seeing you this weekend, whether online or in person.